Chapter 30 of Tristram Shandy, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, Volume 1, by Lawrence Sterne. Chapter 30. When a man gives himself up to the government of a ruling passion, or, in other words, when his hobby horse grows headstrong, farewell cool reason and fair discretion. My uncle Toby's wound was near well, and as soon as the surgeon recovered his surprise and could get leave to say as much, he told him it was just beginning to incarnate, and that if no fresh exfoliation happened, which there was no sign of, it would be dried up in 5 or 6 weeks. The sound of as many Olympiads 12 hours before would have conveyed an idea of shorter duration to my uncle Toby's mind. The succession of his ideas was now rapid. He broiled with impatience to put his design in execution, and so, without consulting farther with any soul living, which, by the by, I think is right, when you are predetermined to take no one soul's advice, he privately ordered Trim, his man, to pack up a bundle of lint and dressings, and hire a chariot and 4 to be at the door exactly by 12 o'clock that day, when he knew my father would be upon change. So, leaving a bank note upon the table for the surgeon's care of him, and a letter of tender thanks for his brothers, he packed up his maps, his books of fortification, his instruments and co., and by the help of a crutch on one side and Trim on the other, my uncle Toby embarked for Shandy Hall. The reason, or rather the rise of this sudden demigration was as follows. The table in my uncle Toby's room, and at which the night before this change happened, he was sitting with his maps and co about him, being somewhat of the smallest for that infinity of great and small instruments of knowledge which usually lay crowded upon it, he had the accident, in reaching over for his tobacco box, to throw down his compasses, and in stooping to take the compasses up with his sleeve, he threw down his case of instruments and snuffers, and as the dice took a run against him, in his endeavouring to catch the snuffers in falling, he thrust Monsieur Blundell off the table and Count Depagon atop of him. It was to no purpose for a man, lame as my uncle Toby was, to think of redressing these evils by himself. He rang his bell for his man Trim. Trim, quoth upon my uncle Toby, prithee see what confusion I have here been making. I must have some better contrivance. Trim, canst thou take my rule and measure the length and breadth of this table, and then go and bespeak me one as big again? Yes, and please your honour, replied Trim, making a bow. But I hope your honour will be soon well enough to get down to your country seat, where, as your honour takes so much pleasure in fortification, we could manage this matter to a T. I must here inform you that this servant of my uncle Toby's, who went by the name of Trim, had been a corporal in my uncle Toby's own company. His real name was James Butler, but having got the nickname of Trim in the regiment, my uncle Toby, unless when he happened to be very angry with him, would never call him by any other name. The poor fellow had been disabled for the service by a wound on his left knee by a musket bullet at the Battle of Landen, which was 2 years before the affair of Namur, and as the fellow was well beloved in the regiment and a handy fellow into the bargain, my uncle Toby took him for his servant, and of an excellent use was he, attending my uncle Toby in the camp and in his quarters as a valet, groom, barber, cook, sempster, and nurse, and indeed from the first to last waited upon him and served him with great fidelity and affection. My uncle Toby loved the man in return, and what attached him more to him still was the similitude of their knowledge. For Corporal Trim, for so for the future I shall call him, by 4 years' occasional attention to his master's discourse upon fortified towns, and the advantage of prying and peeping continually into his master's plans and co., exclusive, and besides what he gained hobby-horsically as a body servant, non-hobby-horsical per se, had become no mean proficient in the science, and was thought by the cook and chambermaid to know as much of the nature of strongholds as my uncle Toby himself. I have but one more strophe to give to finish Corporal Trim's character, and it is the only dark line in it. The fellow loved to advise, or rather to hear himself talk. His carriage, however, was so perfectly respectful, it was easy to keep him silent when you had him so. But set his tongue a-going, you have no hold of him. He was voluble. The eternal interlardings of your honour with the respectfulness of Corporal Trim's manner interceding so strong in behalf of his elocution, that though you might have been incommoded, you could not well be angry. My uncle Toby was seldom either the one or the other with him, or at least this fault in Tim broke no squares with him. My uncle Toby, as I said, loved the man, and besides, as he ever looked upon a faithful servant, but as an humble friend, he could not bear to stop his mouth. Such was Corporal Trim. If I durst presume, continued Trim, to give your honour my advice and speak my opinion in this matter, thou art welcome, Trim, quoth my uncle Toby. Speak, speak what thou thinkest upon the subject, man, without fear. Why then, replied Trim, not hanging his ears and scratching his head like a country lout, but stroking his hair back from his forehead, and standing erect as before his division, I think, quoth Trim, advancing his left, which was his lame leg, a little forwards, and pointing with his right hand open towards a map of Dunkirk, which was pinned against the hangings, I think, quoth Corporal Trim, with humble submission to your honour's better judgment, that these ravelins, bastions, curtains, and hornworks make but a poor, contemptible fiddle-faddle piece of work of it here upon paper, compared to what your honour and I could make of it, were we in the country by ourselves, and had but a rood or a rood and a half of ground to do what we pleased with. As the summer is coming on, continued Trim, your honour might sit out of doors, give me the nography, call it iconography, quoth my uncle, of the town or citadel your honour was pleased to sit down before, and I will be shot by your honour upon the glasses of it, if I did not fortify it to your honour's mind. I dare say thou wouldst, Trim, quoth my uncle, for if your honour, continued the corporal, could but mark me the polygon with its exact lines and angles, that I could do very well, quoth my uncle. I would begin the fosse, and if your honour could tell